Thank you for joining us as we elevate the Black entrepreneur experience by interviewing CEOs, thought leaders, innovative thinkers, and Black entrepreneurs across the globe. I'm your host, Dr. Frances Richards. Are you ready to step into the writing and publishing process and write your book because your story matters? Welcome, Sierra Melcher, founder of Red Thread Publishing.
Hi, Dr. Francis. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
I've given our audience such a brief bio, and I want to say you're welcome. Fill in the gaps and share with our audience what you'd like them to know about you and your business.
Yeah, absolutely. So Red Thread Publishing is a nonfiction publishing process, really on a mission to support 10,000. Originally, we were exclusively for women, and now we've opened new imprints for all folk of all kinds, because our mission is to support folks who have historically been left out of the story, find their voice and get their voice into a larger platform so that we can change the global conversation. That's the backstory. My reason for it personally behind that is, even though as a white woman, I grew up dyslexic, I didn't believe that my story or my voice mattered. And for the longest time, I was convinced that I could not write a book. Now I've written 11. So I love being wrong. And whatever stories we've had holding us back, there is so much need for the voices that have been missing. So we exist to help propel and accelerate some of those missing voices into the global conversation.
Tell us about naming it Red Thread Publishing. Why Red Thread?
Yeah, and I love that you asked that. A lot of people just sort of jump over it and they're like, "Great, what are we going to do with it?" Red Thread, for me, has two significant meanings. One comes from an old myth, and I'll just abbreviate the myth. You may have heard a version, and for years I heard one version of this story, and then later I discovered a second version of the story that blew my mind. And that's a perfect example of how when we only hear one version, we miss some of the depth of what's possible. So is it Theseus and the Minotaur? Okay, there's a monster in a maze and a hero, and the hero goes in and slays the monster, and happily ever after. Okay, that's the story I had heard for years. Then I heard the story retold where the daughter of the king helps Theseus not only get a weapon, but there's two challenges, right? The monster and the maze. How do you find your way into this unknown and back again, assuming that you're not killed by the monster? And so she's standing there and she looks down at her dress, and there's a little red thread loose at the bottom of her dress. And she tugs on it, and she gives him one end. And he walks into the maze, and the further he goes, the more her dress unravels. But she's there holding on to the other end of the red thread to make sure he gets back. So this is sort of an extended version, but that's one of the things that I love, that secondary story that isn't always part of the main conversation, but it gave a place for women to have a really critical role. And we often talk about, when we're looking at this myth, how we have to get vulnerable and stand metaphorically naked or as close to, in order to share our story. It's not a safe thing to step into our voice and name some things that have been missing, and even to own our power. It's terrifying.
Sierra, talk about empowerment and that story around you owning your voice.
So growing up dyslexic, I feel like I have a weird approach to words themselves. For the longest time, I thought that was a problem. Now I think it's the coolest thing in the world. And empowerment is one of these words that I honestly used to use, like, I help you, and thinking that that was empowerment. And now it's really, I think of it as only you can tell your story and only you can empower yourself by walking that journey. That empowerment is not a tool or a gift that anybody else can give you. What we do is we create, and I needed this too. I needed to go through certain steps to change my story, change my perception. And that was my empowerment process. I said the other day to somebody, anybody can write and publish a book. I genuinely believe that every single person on the planet who wants to do that can do that. Or really anything they want to figure out. We live in an age where you can go figure it out. But it took me 15 years to figure it out. What we like to do is accelerate that process. Because I genuinely think anything's possible. But let's not sit around and wait. If you could do something in 8 months, would you like to do it in 8 months or 20 years? So when I'm thinking about empowerment, it's people claiming their own capacity. That's maybe the succinctest way of saying it.
Fill in the blank. Thank you, pandemic, because.
Thank you, pandemic, because it gave the entire planet an opportunity to see what was broken already and forced so many of us to rethink how we were living our lives and how the world was operating so we can walk differently in the future.
Sierra, you're currently living in Colombia, but you were born and raised in the States. Talk about that pivot.
Oh, this is a loaded one, and a lot of people will perhaps disagree with me, and that is good. It's okay to be on different sides. And again, this goes back to, let's have controversy, let's have challenging conversations, let's bring in the maybe not so popular. I'm grateful for having lived in the United States and grown up in the United States, and the privilege that that afforded me, the education and the passport and all the things. Now, so I've been living outside of the US intentionally since about 2006. I lived in China as an international educator for a number of years, moved to Colombia with that same career, and have now been living here for 13 years. And I didn't really leave the US with the intention of always being gone. But now that I have been gone for so long, a couple things are very true. One is, when you step outside of an environment that you have been steeped in your whole existence, whether that's your town or your state or your country, you can reinvent yourself a bit. And it's possible to reinvent yourself in a familiar place, but there's a lot of people and habits and things that want you to stay the same. The other piece about living in another country and culture, for me especially, it helped me see some of the privilege, but also some of the raw underbelly of what was happening in the United States that I couldn't see, as messed up as it was. And so having an alternative perspective sort of any alternative perspective has been really fascinating. And so if anyone has the capacity or interest of traveling, I highly recommend it for what it can do for you. I personally love living in South America. I did not speak the language when I got here. It is humbling to find yourself out of your depths. And, you know, my 7-year-old daughter speaks better Spanish than I do. She comes home and corrects my grammar. And it's important to stay in a continual state of learning when we become adults. And if we don't find ourselves challenged, we can get a little complacent. And so it's really important to be pushed in ways. I think it keeps us agile in our minds. But also, one of the most frustrating things about living in South America is now what I think the best is in the US, we are so urgently obsessed and living a really high pressure life. When we step into a Latin culture, there is more ease and joy woven into the daily experience. When I first moved here, the like, tranquila, don't worry about it. Mañana, I wanted to strangle everybody. I was like, let's get it done urgently right now. And I am still in a full immersion of just slow down. And that has been really powerful in that it allows for me to recognize what's really important and what's worth fighting for. And where I had myself in a fuss about stuff that was not as important. And that distinction really now allows me to devote my energy and attention quite purposefully to things and make progress in those ways, if that makes sense. So we're accelerating people's processes without burning out, we're making huge amounts of difference by slowing down. If that makes, it seems contradictory, and from what I remember as a sort of an American perspective is if you want to make huge change, you have to work yourself to the bone. And I did. I feel like we're making more impact without going as crazy. And I think I partly learned that from being here. So I'm grateful for that.
Thank you for that and being so authentic and sharing your heart. And I'm going to unpack some of those things. What is important to Sierra?
Leaving the world better than I found it. And that used to be part of my cause for burning out. I was living on the edge of burnout because the world was really messed up. And I felt like I had to solve the world's problems myself. Somebody was asking me the other day, well, why don't you do your whole business differently? And I said, well, I was just looking at our author's website, the page on our website where our books are listed, and the women that we've helped in the last couple of years to become authors. The Red Thread has basically 3 pillars about what's important to us: the writing, the publishing, and the impact. And the writing and the publishing is for the impact. That's really the point, is that folks are using their voices to make a difference. And I look at the books that are in the world and the women who've become authors and all the people that they're able to reach. Leaving the world better than I found it. I work with a small number of people so that they can work with thousands more. And this collaborative, collective, purposeful acceleration of getting our voices into the world feels like we're doing what's important, leaving the world even slightly better than we found it.
How do you make impact daily?
I used to think that making impact daily was measured in deliverables and, get another client and reach another, however many thousand on social media. And this echoes my answer to some of your earlier questions. I think if I have the energy to share a smile with a stranger and have energy to support someone in their journey, I think it's the smaller things that have a larger impact than being an exhausted wreck and hitting all those metrics, right? Making impact for me has to do with living in alignment with the world that I want to be in. And for the longest time, I was missing that. I was working so hard that I was part of the problem. I didn't have any energy to be kind to someone because I was working so hard to save the world. That makes sense.
Talk about motherhood and entrepreneurship.
I used to think they did not agree and that you sort of had to choose one or the other. I am so glad that I have a new perspective and I completely disagree with my previous opinion. Having my daughter kicked in to overdrive what was already in existence. In college, I was passionate about making the world a better place. For 15 years, I was an educator around the world with the purpose of empowering young people to live their best lives. But when I became a parent, the way that I wanted to show up in the world shifted. And I had already been an entrepreneur before then, but for like a second. And having a young person in my life really connects me in a different way to the future and how I can use my life to create a better future. Both modeling it in my own home, practicing, exploring what I'm capable of so that my daughter learns what she's capable of from firsthand experience, but also and I love that I'm not the only person saying this and that this is not the first time anyone's heard this. We need to see ourselves in the story. Women need to see and hear their voices represented. People of color need to hear and see their voices in order for them to each step forward and take their place. Otherwise, we become responsible for holding ourselves back. And so each person who's stepping forward is blazing a trail and sharing a little bit of themselves to create more space for people to step forward themselves. And I see a cultural change happening. Of course, I'm a little bit impatient and I want it to have happened yesterday. Like every person who ever talks to me, I say, when do you want your book to come out? I said, like last week. I want it out yesterday. But with each person who is stepping into their voice, writing their story, sharing their book, they're making, and it comes back again to impact. When you write a book, you have no idea who's going to read it. We actually talk about a book like a baby all the time. When you're writing your book, it's like being pregnant. When you publish your book, it is all of the very similar pains and fears of giving birth. And then you've brought something into the world, and with proper marketing and just attending to your book, you're raising a baby in the world that can bring gifts to countless people. But as writers, we usually don't ever know who read our book, what impact we've had. And in that way, it's such an act of faith and love. Faith that our effort is going to have meaning for another person on the planet. And we just pour ourselves into this creation with no guarantee that anything positive is going to come out of it, but we do it anyway. And that's the faith and love. Somewhere in there, I lost the train of your actual question, but I think entrepreneurialism is also that leap of there is no guarantee that it's going to work. But the possibility when it does, even when it doesn't feel like it's working because it is so hard, the impact, the benefit, the payoff, again, it's not always in money, and it's not always in the ways that we think we're making a difference. But it is this courageous thing of, I have a vision of something different, and I'm going to devote my energy towards it. And that is so powerful. Because in some ways, we're remaking the world. As parents, as entrepreneurs, as authors, we're taking what we see and saying, yeah, I want to make that a little bit better. And I love that.
Sierra, I want you to have a monologue. I want you to name this person, living or not, and they've inspired you so much. Who is that person, and what are you saying?
An individual person or a sort of amalgamation of a kind of person?
No, it's a person, living or not.
Okay, one individual. I'm so grateful that you had the courage to live your life to the absolute fullest with no evidence that you would be successful, and yet you did it anyway, and look at all that you've created.
Who is the person? Who are you talking to?
Several of the authors that I've worked with, but one in particular. I watch people come. They come with this doubt, actually. They say, I don't think I can do this. But they're taking steps, active steps, to do this thing that they say they don't believe they can do, but they must believe they can do it. Otherwise, they wouldn't be taking these steps, right? And the one author that I'm thinking about in particular, she actually, she just died in November. But she wrote and published her book last year. And the last message she and I shared, and we knew she had only a few days left. She said, my book is my legacy. It's the gift I get to leave to the world. And this woman did amazing things for years. And I think when everything feels like it's going all right in our lives, we don't recognize how much we're contributing. And when our mortality steps up, it changes the perspective so much. And she wrote, her book is about how getting cancer saved her life. And it flips the whole conversation. I mean, it doesn't make sense, but the way she lived as a result of being diagnosed with cancer was the way she had wished she'd lived her whole life. And I'm just really inspired by her. And she's just an example of so many people doing the impossible, what we think is impossible, and then they do it, and then it's not impossible.
Whoa. Thank you for sharing that, and my sincere sympathy for your loss. Speaking of legacy, when it's all said and done, how do you want to be remembered?
I'm having some internal wrestling, honestly, with that question, because as a publisher, my success is other people's success. And a lot of the time, beyond the authors, nobody knows who I am or what I do. And for the most part, I'm sort of fine with that. The limelight, like I don't want to be on a billboard or anything. I want to be remembered as the facilitator of accelerating this change for people. Showing them that they're more capable than they believe themselves to be.
Becoming Sierra Melcher. How did you become?
Slowly. And definitely not in a straight line. A lot of twists and turns, and with not dead ends, but with every turn, every adversity was actually the best thing. It was the opportunity for me to see what wasn't easy and what needed attention. I think about my daughter and all the ease in her life isn't serving her, but the challenges are. And so I traveled, like I moved around a lot when I was little. My parents were separated and I was moving around, and those were challenges. They became strengths. Growing up dyslexic was a challenge that became a strength. And so I think converting the challenges into our greatest tools has been my favorite part, actually.
What is your zone of genius?
I love a good problem. I love seeking solutions for things that seem impossible. And often when I know that I'm taking care of myself, when my intuition is spot on, when I hear somebody come with something and I feel instantaneously what they need. That doesn't work when I'm not taking care of myself. Um, but it is definitely one of the strengths, and creative problem solving is probably one of my number one skill sets.
What problem in the world today would you like to solve?
Hmm. There's so many problems in the world, but the one that I'm well positioned to support people to address is I want to serve people to recognize that they have a lot more power and influence than maybe they have been brought up to believe. I believe in this tipping point concept that if a few people do what they can, we actually have a lot more influence and impact than we think. That Margaret Mead quote, a few, can't remember exactly, but the few people making some effort has a lot more impact to change the world the way it's only ever happened. So I believe that each of us has a lot of influence. When we know that and we step into it, the world can change really quickly.
Speaking of influence, who are your top two influencers or mentors, and what lessons do they teach you?
Hmm. I, for about 8 years, I've had a mentor. Most people have never heard of her. Her name's Dr. Onani Carver. Um, and certainly what I've learned from her and through her has been fundamental in my life and in my growing. Um, she she's a scientist, and she looks at things from the microbiology, like the tiniest things in the universe, but also almost on this mystical cosmic level, and recognizing that there's not as much difference between the tiny and the enormous as we would like to think. That we, often will put those on a line and make them diametrically opposed, big and small, micro and cosmic. But recognizing, again, even science and mysticism, that there's only, imagine instead of a straight line that it's a circle, and there are 2 points right next to each other on a circle, that the laws of the universe that can be observed in the micro are also available in the macro. That some of the concepts I've learned from her have just fundamentally changed the way I think about the universe. And honestly, I would actually have to say that my daughter is the other. Um, she constantly teaches me things that I feel like I must have forgotten long ago. Divine truths about what it means to be human and connect and love and be playful. Get out of my head a bit and back into the things that are so fleeting but so important.
The word is play. How did you play today, or how will you play today?
Um, I I love that that's the next question, because my daughter is certainly like my play guru. Um, she'll be home shortly, and there's gonna be some giggle, and even when we lock heads, it's diffusing that with something silly that brings us back together. Um, she and my dog are both are the play gurus. So um, I rely on them both a lot. The only other thing I can think of is like taking my morning walk, having my cup of coffee, and sitting in the sunshine, because I live in South America and it's February and I can still sit in the sunshine. And that maybe is more just joy than play, but it's the energy of being silly and flexible that honestly is not my strength. And it's really helpful to have a couple of silly creatures in my life to bring me back.
How did you raise capital to start your business?
Oh, painfully slowly. And honestly, I bit off more than I could chew at the beginning and hired really expensive people that I couldn't afford to pay, and would advise some uh, some alternative way of doing that if I could live it again. Um, but I definitely took some risks, um, and cleaned out my own. I spent $8,000 of that was all that I had at the time to make the initial steps. Um, and this is actually my third business. Um, and this business, I knew I was on to something because immediately I had people who wanted what I was offering. It was not that way in my previous businesses, but this business basically begged to exist. Um, and I created the business to answer the need that I saw. Um, and so I'm super grateful for the way that played out. But I was really listening for what what people were asking for, and I also continue to keep my prices as affordable as possible, um, to keep the mission at the core. But I could probably easily double what we charge, and I just don't want to. Um, yeah, but I took a huge risk and I spent all my money and agreed to pay people what I didn't know how I was going to pay them. Um, it worked, but it doesn't always. So I'm not sure I should be offering that as tried and tested practice.
What feeds your soul?
Oh, green space, quiet, um, moonlight. I'm an introvert, in case that wasn't obvious. But I love being with people and watching them grow. But what I need in order to keep doing that is moments of quiet by myself.
What breaks your heart?
I don't watch the news. I can't. Um, and it's not the news that breaks my heart, but what is happening with people around the world, and this sense of isolation and disconnection and the harm that we do to one another. That I think the root is that disconnection and isolation, that we don't see our common humanity. But yeah.
What can we do right now to support you and your business?
Hmm. I love that question. I always think about how my business can support others, but um, share what we're doing with people who need us. Um, um, Help us accomplish our mission of supporting more people to get their stories told in the world through social media or word of mouth is honestly the most powerful tool that's ever worked for us. People hear about us and they say, I know somebody who's trying to write a book. I know somebody who's got a great story. Let me connect to you. And and that sense of community really creates the connections for the right people um, to come at the right time.
Sierra, if you conducted this interview, what is the one question you would have asked yourself? I want you to ask the question and answer it.
Hmm, great question. If you could be of service or add value to listeners, what would you say? That would be the question I'd ask. And my answer is whether or not you have ever desired to write a book or um, feel that your story is worthwhile, I would like you to ask yourself and sit with this for a moment of how you can show up to bring value to those around you. It does not have to be in the form of a book. A book is just one of the ways that we bring value to one another and to the larger world. But if I could add and invite every listener to seek how they are bringing value and how that they are precious and that their voices matter, however and wherever they're choosing to dedicate their attention.
We've come to the part of our interview. It's called Rapid Round of Fun. I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and I'd like you to give me very quick answers. If there's something you desire not to answer, feel free to say pass. Are you ready for the rapid round of fun?
I am ready. Bring it. Let's see what happens.
Your favorite color,
Blue.
your favorite holiday,
Summer.
your ideal car,
I don't care about cars.
your favorite comfort food,
Chocolate.
your first job,
Unofficially babysitter, officially assistant manager at a video store back in the day when they had those.
the last movie you saw,
I watched half of something terrible on Netflix. I have no idea what it was called.
you relax doing what,
Sitting on my balcony, listening to the birds.
your favorite singer or rapper,
I love music, and I honestly, I don't pay attention to the names. Yeah.
your, fav- your favorite dance song,
My daughter is more into this than anything. I think this week's dance song is the sped up version of the song by Lady Gaga that now is accompanying the Wednesday dance craze that's happening. I don't remember what it's called.
what food you eat every week, no matter what,
Does coffee count?
work out or hit the couch,
definitely at the couch.
Sierra Melcher, thank you so much for joining us on Black Entrepreneur Experience Podcast. Before we let you go, share with our audience the best way for them to connect with you and do business with you, and feel free to leave all your social media handles.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We are redthreadbooks.com, also Red Thread Books on Instagram. Those are probably our best two channels for initial connecting. And we have a very active Facebook community where once folks are interested in connecting with us, we really connect other authors to be supportive so that it's not this hierarchical top down, but rather rising together. So I really look forward to hearing from anyone at redthreadbooks.com or on Instagram, redthreadbooks.
Thank you, Sierra. That's a wrap.
Thank you.